What makes R&B a unique genre of music? What kinds of sounds and lyrical themes are characteristic to it? Why is it so important to and for the African American community? What does the acronym R&B even mean? That's what we're going to learn about in today's video, the R&B Genre Explained. But before we start learning everything there is to know about R&B music, I want to let everyone know that my new channel, the Online School of Pop Culture, is the new home of video essays on all things music, movies, TV, books, theater, food, and drink that I used to post on my channel From Laura's Perspective, which is now called The Autistic Advocate. If that's the kind of content you want from me, just click subscribe. But also make sure to tap on the bell so you always know when I've posted something new. First off, what exactly does the term R&B mean? R&B stands for Rhythm and Blues, and that name more than fits the bill of its namesake music. It was originally called race music because of its association with the African American community, but R&B came to replace that term after it came to be considered offensive. For a long time, this genre was categorized alongside blues and soul music, but those have since come to be considered their own distinctive genres. Lawrence Cohn, author of Nothing But the Blues, wrote that rhythm and blues was an umbrella term invented for industry convenience. According to Cohn, the term embraced all black music except classical music and religious music, unless a gospel song sold enough to break into the charts. Even to this day, the term R&B continues to be used in some contexts to categorize music made by black musicians as something different from styles of music made by other musicians. So what does R&B music generally sound like? Generally speaking, R&B music uses one or more of the following instruments, usually at least two: the double bass, a drum kit, an electric guitar, an electric organ, horns, a piano, or a saxophone. In the commercial R&B music typical of the 1950s through the 1970s, the bands usually consisted of piano, one or two guitars, bass, drums, and saxophone. Arrangements were rehearsed to the point of effortlessness and were sometimes accompanied by background vocalists. Simple repetitive parts mesh, creating momentum and rhythmic interplay, producing mellow, lilting, and often hypnotic textures while calling attention to no individual sound. While singers are emotionally engaged with the lyrics, often intensely so, they remain cool, relaxed, and in control. Lyrically, R&B songs touch on themes of pain, struggle, economic and aspirational triumphs and failures, and the quest for freedom and joy. These themes come up in the lives of African Americans who've endured great persecution and suffering throughout America's history. So when and where did R&B all begin? The Great Migration of Black Americans to the urban industrial centers of Chicago, Detroit, New York City, and Los Angeles in the 1920s and 1930s created a new market for jazz, blues, and related genres of music. These genres were often performed by full-time solo and group musicians. The artists made R&B from its precursors of jazz and blues music by placing an increasingly prevalent emphasis on electric guitar as a lead instrument. Simply put, African American communities in the 1940s are where all R&B all started. In 1948, RCA Victor was marketing black music under the name Blues and Rhythm. In that year, Louis Jordan dominated the top 5 listings of the R&B charts with 3 songs, and 2 of the top 5 songs were based on the boogie-woogie rhythms that had come to prominence. Jordan's music, along with that of Big Joe Turner, Roy Brown, Billy Wright, and Wynonie Harris, is now referred to as jump blues, which should probably get a video all of its own. In 1949, the term rhythm and blues replaced the Billboard category Harlem Hit Parade. Also in that year, The Hucklebuck, recorded by bandleader and saxophonist Paul Williams, was the #1 R&B tune, remaining on top of the charts for nearly the entire year. Written by musician and arranger Andy Gibson, the song was described as a dirty boogie because its lyrics were risque and raunchy. Paul Williams and his Hucklebuckers concerts were sweaty, riotous affairs that got shut down more than once. Their lyrics, by Roy Alfred, who later co-wrote the 1955 hit The Rock and Roll Waltz, were mildly sexually suggestive, and one teenager from Philadelphia said that Hucklebuck was a very nasty dance. Also in 1949, an R&B remix of a 1920s blues song, Ain't Nobody's Business, was a #4 hit for Jimmy Witherspoon, and Louis Jordan and the Timpani 5 once again made the top 5 with Saturday Night Fish Fry. Many of these hit records were issued on new independent record labels such as Savoy, King, Imperial, Specialty, Chess, and Atlantic. Now it's time to talk about a particularly important aspect of the R&B rhythm. The Afro-Cuban rhythmic motifs commonly used in R&B music date all the way back to the 1800s. One of the most popular of these is the Cuban contradanza, also known as the habanera. The habanera rhythm can be thought of as a combination of tresillo and the backbeat. The habanera was prominent in jazz music, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a precursor genre to R&B. Examples of the habanera in classic African American music include hand clapping and foot stomping patterns in ring shout, post-Civil War drum and fife music, and New Orleans second line music. Tresillo is the most basic duple pulse rhythmic cell in sub-Saharan African music traditions, and its use in African American music is one of the clearest examples of African rhythmic retention in the United States. The use of tresillo was continuously reinforced by the consecutive waves of Cuban music, which were adopted into North American pop culture. Afro-Cuban music was the conduit by which African American music was re-Africanized, so to speak, through the adoption of two-celled figures like clave and Afro-Cuban instruments like the conga, drum, bongos, maracas, and claves. According to John Storm Roberts, R&B became the vehicle for the return of Cuban elements into mainstream popular music. So now let's talk about the second decade of R&B music. We all know at this point that R&B music was by and for African Americans. At first, black people were the only ones buying copies of R&B albums. But in the early 1950s, as the genre spread and gained popularity, the industry started to attract white customers, particularly teenage ones. But don't take my word for it. Here's a little statistic to back me up. 40% of 1952 sales at Dolphins of Hollywood record shop, located in an African American part of Los Angeles, were to white customers. Johnny Otis is one example of a figure who rose to prominence in the R&B industry in the 1950s. In 1951 alone, he produced hits such as Double Crossing Blues, Mistrustin' Blues, and Cupid's Boogie. Otis's other hits include G Baby, Mambo Boogie, and All Night Long. Then there was Ruth Brown, who's known today as the Queen of R&B. Brown placed hits in the top 5 every year from 1951 through 1954. Teardrops from My Eyes, 5, 10, 15 hours, Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean, and What a Dream are some examples of said hits. It was also in the 1950s that R&B started to develop a really strong influence on the rising genre of rock and roll. A 1985 article in the Wall Street Journal titled "Rock, It's Still Rhythm and Blues" reported that the two terms were used interchangeably until about 1957. Other sources quoted in the article said that rock and roll combined R&B with pop and country music. So now let's talk about how R&B has evolved from the 1960s to this very day. The 1960s ushered in a new era of R&B artists who brought new talent to the genre but stayed true to its tradition. Some of the most notable evidence of this includes Sam Cooke's number 5 hit Chain Gang and pop rocker Chubby Checker's number 5 hit The Twist. R&B label Motown Records had its first million-selling single in 1960 with The Miracles' Shop Around, and in 1961, Stack Records had its first hit with Carla Thomas's Gee Whiz, Look at His Eyes. By the 1970s, the term rhythm and blues was being used as a blanket term for soul, funk, and disco. But in my eyes, these all stand on their own as distinctive genres, each deserving their own video. In the late 80s and early 90s, hip-hop started to capture the imagination of America's youth. R&B started to become homogenized, with a group of high-profile producers responsible for most R&B hits. R&B artists struggled with the stiff competition hip-hop posed, but some adopted a hip-hop image and were marketed as such, often featuring rappers on their songs. In 1990, Billboard magazine reintroduced R&B to categorize all of black popular music other than hip-hop, and this aided in the success of such artists as Usher, R. Kelly, Janet Jackson, TLC, Aaliyah, Destiny's Child, Tevin Campbell, Boyz II Men, and Mary J. Blige. 2004 was a really good year for R&B music, as 80% of the songs that topped the R&B charts were also at the top of the Hot 100. But from there, sales of R&B records steadily went down. At the same time, since 2010, hip-hop has started to take cues from the R&B sound, choosing to adopt a softer, smoother sound that incorporates traditional R&B with rappers such as Drake, who has opened an entirely new door for the genre. This sound has gained in popularity and created great controversy for both hip-hop and R&B as how to identify each one. But one thing we can all agree on at this point is that R&B is one aspect of music history, and black history for that matter, that just can't be ignored, especially when it comes to the role of the black community in the music industry. What was the most interesting thing you learned about R&B music today? Let me know in the comments down below, and also boop the like button to send the message that you did, in fact, learn something. If you want even more video essays on all things music, theater, books, movies, TV, food, and drink, smash that subscribe button. But also make sure to click on the bell so that your device goes off whenever I post something that might pique your interest. In the meantime, check out some other content of mine by clicking the links on your screen. I hope to see you back here next time.